So hello everyone and welcome to today's AMA event. Let's get marketing back to work, moving careers and teams forward. I am David Capisi, Programming Chair for AMA Tampa Bay. Today we gather as marketers, communicators, and digital leaders in the midst of COVID-19 and the COVID-19 disruption. And while the world has changed, the need for our inspiration, our storytelling, and business impact remains intact. And just as Tracy mentioned in the opening chat, humanity is coming back into everything with greater diversity and inclusivity, and we're going to cover some of that today as well. So in today's session, our panel of experts will share their perspective as our marketing community and Tampa Bay community aim to get marketing careers and marketing teams moving forward. For today's event, brought to you by AMA Tampa Bay, it's also brought to you in partnership with the Tampa Bay Chamber. And thank you in particular to Jacquelyn Vasvari-Toke from the Chamber, who is going to lead and moderate today's session. Jacquelyn is Senior Director of Strategic Communications and Marketing at the Chamber. Like me, Jacquelyn comes to Tampa Bay by way of New Jersey, where she was First Lieutenant in the Air Force and Public Affairs Officer at the 108th Wing at McGuire Air Force Base. In addition to Jacquelyn's Public Affairs and Communications leadership, Jacquelyn also sits on the University of South Florida, so USF's Digital Marketing Advisory Board. Jacquelyn, over to you to get us started and introduce today's panel.
Thank you so much, David. Yes, as David said, I have been at the Chamber for a little over 2.5 years now, and proudly serving as their Senior Director of Strategic Communications and Marketing. So I was super excited to get involved on this panel today. We have a ton of great information to share with you and 3 really great panelists that will help share that information. So I'm going to kick it off to each of them to give a little brief intro of their background. So Doug Pace, CEO of Stonehill, if you could give us a quick intro to yourself and some of your background.
Doug Pace, I founded and I lead a company called Stonehill. We are a strategy and innovation firm, work primarily in design thinking, which is an empathy-based strategy framework to deliver automation, digital enablement, obviously marketing. Been in the community for over 25 years. Prior to this, I owned a company called Bayshore Solutions, sold it about 4 years ago. And our biggest claim to fame right now at Stonehill is we are the reigning U.S. Chamber Emerging Business of the Year.
That is awesome. Super proud accomplishment. We're going to next kick it off to Keri Higgins-Bigelow. She is the CEO and founder of livingHR. Keri, can you give us a quick bio and description of your background?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all, and thanks for your service, Jacquelyn. That's awesome. I am the CEO and founder of livingHR. We've been around for about 11 years. We call ourselves the work agency, and we do everything from the inside out of an organization. So we focus on building inclusive cultures, designing employee experiences, and building and developing really humanized work. So our focus is really on providing lift to the people function, and we operate a lot like a marketing agency, but for the people function of an organization, and really figuring out what their culture and brand stand is all about internally so that they can live that externally with their consumer brands.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And last but certainly not least, Bill Carlson, President at Tucker Hall. If you could give us a quick bio.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me today. I appreciate the Chamber and AMA. I'm president of Tucker Hall. We're a leading public relations, public affairs firm. We help companies and organizations grow through better communication. We help them deal with political issues, and we help them deal with crisis issues. Before this, I was working in Asia, based in Singapore, was working for a branding company, working with the Singapore government on economic development, other things, and working across Asia with fast-growing companies, and happy to be in Tampa.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today, all of you. So the first question I'm going to ask is geared towards everyone. So jump in as you'd like. So we kind of talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but what's the biggest trend that you've seen over the past 6 months related to marketing, teams, and employment? And how has this trend evolved from the beginning of COVID-19 until current times? Whoever wants to start first.
I'll jump in if you want. I mean, one thing is people working remotely. I don't know how much of this you covered before, but working remotely, of course, is different. Trying to build a corporate culture remotely. For big companies that had always done it, it's not new. But for smaller businesses or fast-growing businesses, it's been different. And then also with nonprofits and government agencies, The world has instantly become more global, more connected. It's just as easy now with all the technology to stay in touch with somebody across the world than it is here. And then somebody mentioned this earlier, but with the Black Lives Matters movement and the civil rights movement, everything has changed again. So there are a lot of other things I could say, but that is probably even a bigger shift than COVID-19. The new civil rights movement has changed everything about communication. I'm sure we'll get onto it later.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think it's all about the humans, right? Like that if we weren't at the center of everything for a moment there because we let technology sort of trump us, I think, no pun intended. The main idea there is that if you think about where we are putting our focus, we're all on these screens now. And so trying to figure out ways to connect with people beyond technology, you know, when it's so hard with social distancing and then inclusivity and making sure that we're really able to create cultures of belonging in a really remote world. You know, I think all of that is right. And I don't think it's going to be slowing down. You know, the pace of change and the adaptability, and everybody keeps throwing out the word resilience, and, you know, our ability to adapt in a low touch economy and focus on humans, to me, are really the big trends.
Yeah, the two things that I saw kind of go along with that is experience is obviously become a big element, right? As restaurants have gone to not being in location and delivering or what have you, and people getting things delivered more to their house, experience has shifted. It's become even more important than it was prior. The other thing that's been really interesting is old-fashioned storytelling has kind of come back. If you noticed at the beginning of COVID, there was a lot of the advertisement that we're all in this together. And it was almost to the point that everybody was saying the same thing in their messaging. But that shifted, as Bill was saying, with Black Lives Matter and some of the other elements that are going on right now. And even in the West Coast with some of the fires and some of the tragedies that we're seeing, that old-fashioned storytelling is coming back to bring people together.
Completely agree. I've seen all of those things. And it's interesting how things, you know, something is the big topic of discussion and then something else comes in, but it's still, there's intertwines of what was already being discussed woven into what's currently happening. So completely agree on that. This question's geared towards Bill and Keri. So how are cultures of performance management changing for teams and also in marketing with this digital shift?
I'll go. You know, one thing that I think we're seeing a greater sense of visibility in the data and looking at what data is coming through digitally, and then how we lift and inspire teams is also really different, you know, in terms of staying connected and creating real-time feedback and working together more collaboratively virtually. Is what is improving performance. You know, it's not about taking the hard line and doing performance appraisals and, you know, those sorts of things. It's really about how do you make sure that you're coaching and developing and connecting with teams, like one-on-one and in teams, more often and more meaningful ways. And that's what's improving performance and letting people kind of, you know, stick with it.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, our firm has always been about management by objectives. And so an environment where some people are working from home, some people are working from the office or wherever they are on vacation, that's been a system that we've kind of had in all along, and we've tried to encourage that with our clients. But now what's happening is that the objectives are changing. You know, data-driven marketing has created some sets of metrics, but the political world has created another. You know, many companies stepped into trouble when marketers innocently, you know, said things like "all lives matter," and you know, when 250 or 1,000 people start to post negative comments, you know, we get calls from clients saying, "What did we do wrong?" And so I think it's not just the standard marketing metrics. We also have to make sure that sensitivity to and training for the political environment and the communication landscape within which we're communicating, because a simple marketing message may backfire. Remember the Pepsi commercial a few years ago that offended so many people, even before this current civil rights movement. And so we just have to make sure that we're putting any kind of communication, not just through an algorithm, but through a sensitivity test as well.
Completely agree with that. And I think you hit the nail on the head talking about, you know, the Pepsi commercial that everyone remembers, what seemed like a, you know, nonchalant, nothing was going to go wrong kind of idea. It, you know, if you didn't realize all of the implications of what was being said, then it could be huge. And so that's one of those situations that if your communications and marketing team is not in the loop and doesn't realize everything that's going on, it could be detrimental. Next question is geared towards Doug and Keri. So what are the new best practices in communications, creativity, and collaborations as teams manage from brainstorming all the way to get execution in a mostly remote world?
Go ahead, Doug.
So my firm is a design thinking firm, and although design thinking is not necessarily new, it's seen a resurgence. And as I said, design thinking is really an empathy-based framework where you spend most of your time trying to understand your user or your customer and what they really want. Not just what they say they want, but what do they really want. That's been the resurgent. You know, on top of that, I think somebody said earlier that there hasn't been a time when customer needs have moved so quickly and transformed so quickly. So using sprint-based frameworks to execute on those and get items out very quickly. It's never been as important as it is today because users, consumers, customers have never had as much power as they have in the past. You know, if you have a bad experience right now, you can go online, you can voice your concern, you can get a lot of people aligned with you, and you can make or break an organization pretty quick, or at least make your voice very heard. So it's all about empathy and you know, design thinking. There's Google Sprints. There's a lot of different frameworks around it. We really like design thinking, but also moving very quickly through sprints or an agile type methodology.
Yeah, I think, you know, you said the word voice, and I think that's an important part of what's happening with collaboration too, is that because we're all equal squares on a box these days, there's a lot of new technology that's emerged to make collaboration just from a practical sense even easier. Tools like Mural and Miro, and being able to ensure that everybody can put their input somewhere, and everybody, I'm noticing that people that normally didn't speak up in meetings now feel more comfortable doing it. We don't have some people remote and some people distributed in a lot of cases, and so we're kind of sharing actually more space to be able to hear different voices. And I think that's the whole point of diversity too, right? Is that when you have different voices and they're actually heard, then you get better innovation. And so I think that's what we're starting to see by leveraging just where we're at. And it's out of necessity, but it's also, I think, you know, a good thing, really.
And I love that you mentioned Mural. Mural's basically, if people haven't heard of it, it's an interactive whiteboard, for lack of a better word, that you can have digital sticky notes and things like that. And we use it all the time now. We were starting to use it, but we did a lot of in person, and now it's basically our tool of the day. And we interact with companies, you know, as I said, London, New Zealand, Australia, all at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, we just facilitated like huge global listening sessions for creating diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging with leadership teams all over the world. And, you know, it makes that possible, and also I think actually better in a way. So I'm, you know, I guess happy with the silver lining that emerged from leveraging more of those tools.
Keri, you talk about something that we're actually going to get right into now, is how is diversity, equity, and inclusion playing more into marketing organizations? I know we've kind of touched on it, but does anyone have anything to share about how they've seen it impacted? I'll
go and let you guys go next. But you know, to me, it's just all about if you authentically stood for advancing and giving voice to people that are underrepresented in an organization before. Do you strategically seek out diversity? Do you like serve a diverse customer base? Do you then help them feel a sense of belonging when they're a part of your organization in whatever way that is. And so the organizations that were doing that already are the ones that should authentically be talking about it, because they can give examples for the ones that weren't. The problem is that people are, doing it and from a brand perspective, but they're not doing it from a culture perspective. And it requires it to be really there internally. And so, I hope personally that, the listening doesn't stop, the actions don't stop, that it's not just putting like lipstick on a pig. Like that is, I'm so tired of organizations, frankly, saying they're going to do one thing, but actually doing another inside. And so until they make the commitments to have more representation, pay equitably internally, they really shouldn't be talking about it externally.
Yeah, the authenticity is key. We're doing a project right now for a very large company, and they are looking at diversity and inclusion and wondering why do they not have more Latinx and Black leaders in their organization? And they have a goal of doubling that. But they're very advanced in their thinking, in that they said, we're just not going to put individuals in those spots. We really want to figure out how to build individuals for those spots. So we want to go all the way back and try to solve the problem. So we're doing everything from looking at individuals' career journeys and looking at what are those individual skill sets that you would never think. I relate it to, when I got my first job, somebody said, I'd wear a polo Oxford cloth suit with shirt with my suit. And somebody told me, no, you wear pinpoint Oxfords with a suit. You don't wear Oxford cloth. I never knew it, but unless somebody tells you, you don't know. So how many of those skill sets that if you didn't, go to the right schools or have the right jobs or have the same career path as everybody around you, that you never, got exposure to or never got told? It's very important. And I just think it's one of the most advanced thought process that I've heard around it.
Just to add to what my colleagues here said, I think the really, really important skill set, and Keri kind of mentioned earlier, is active listening. We need to listen, and we need to listen with diverse sets of ears. The example I gave before about companies that innocently said all lives matter, they didn't understand the significance of what that meant. And so they posted it thinking it was a positive. And what we need to do is make sure that organizations are listening to the community, listening to feedback around the marketing messages they're sending. Ideally, in old days, you would run marketing messages through focus groups, but now you need to make sure you run them through kind of diversity filters to make sure that there's nothing offensive in there. Okay. And then constantly listen to what's being said in the public. And the next step after that is when you find out that there's something going wrong, the most important thing is to engage as soon as possible. Many companies want to put their head in the sand and say, well, this will go away. The protests will go away. The complaints will go away. I don't think it is going to go away. It started a long time ago, 60s and before, but the civil rights movement is moving very quickly, and it's going to completely transform our culture in the United States, and it's transforming the culture around the world. So we need to make sure that companies are attuned to it, not just that they're not making mistakes, but that they're engaging in a meaningful way all their audiences. And the last thing is that we can't just look at the audiences as segmented groups inside algorithms. We have to think of them as people, and how do you build relationships with people?
That's huge. And I actually just got a question in from one of our attendees. Beth had asked, Bill, can you kind of explain more about the diversity filters that you discussed?
Well, you could set it up in formal and informal ways, but understanding that if you have a diverse staff, they can look through, and it's not just, you all see Mad Men where they, in the first episode where they brought out the Jewish person to go to a Jewish pitch. It can't be a stereotypical thing. You have to make sure that you're listening to communities and you're getting feedback from communities, that you have resources inside and outside your organization who can give you feedback on different kinds of messages and events going on. That's one of the values of outside consulting firms, is because even even though you may have a diverse internal team, just getting a second opinion or outside opinion from somebody who's seeing lots of messages flowing in lots of different directions for many organizations will help you determine what may or may not work. There are lots of marketing examples over the years of product launches that didn't succeed because they weren't culturally sensitive. Now we have to be careful that we're not stepping on landmines. And I think in 5 or 10 years, our language will change so that words that we were using before that we thought were benign will not be in our vocabulary. But in the meantime, we all have to think through the meaning of what we're saying.
Completely agree. That's a great explanation. Thank you. So this is geared towards Keri. What's one piece of advice you can share on team engagement, leadership, and training?
So I guess the first thing is to do it. I think a lot of times right now people are losing focus on developing the skills. And right now it's not about roles, it's about capabilities. And so figuring out like what capabilities the organization needs now, forget what you did, you know, pre-COVID obviously, but you know, we're as leaders, you know, we talked about empathy and emotional intelligence and all of those things earlier. And there's a totally different skill set needed for leaders now. It's not about pushing, it's about preventing burnout. It's about mental health and well-being. It's about making sure that people know how to lead inclusively. It's about emotional intelligence. And so, you know, really taking a look at what capabilities your organization has and what it's missing, and then continuing to provide opportunities. I mean, it's not like there's not enough virtual conferences out there right now, right? So, you know, there's plenty of access to information and development now more than ever. So making a commitment to it, like our team has internally, everybody has to attend to virtual conferences and report back. And ideally they're out of our norm. And so, you know, just sharing and really making it part of your everyday. It doesn't have to be this like formalized Excel spreadsheet of learning content. It can really be more organic than that, but building the skills as leaders to take care of people is really important right now.
Completely agree. Doug, I see you nodding your head. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, yeah, I just totally agree with everything she said. Is COVID has shifted a lot of what we expect of each other, right? Is I was talking to another CEO the other day, and he said, man, you know, I think my staff was working really hard right after COVID happened, and now they're distracted, and what should I do? And I said, well, you know, first, thank them for working really hard, because I think we all worked really hard after COVID started, and we were all taking on different duties. But I think to the point, it's trying to figure out which direction do you want to go and making sure you're having those discussions. It's very easy to be out of sight, out of mind. And as leaders, we have to do what's right for our own organizations to overcome that. But out of sight, out of mind doesn't help anybody.
Can I add one thing? The other thing that we have to think about is effective community relations. And in the past, what would happen if companies wanted to show diversity, they would sponsor diverse organizations like an Asian chamber, a Hispanic chamber, or NAACP. But what we've got to do now is to think about it beyond money. It's not that you sponsor a table annually at the NAACP meeting and they make money off it. Offer to let one or more of your staff go to an NAACP meeting, and they're virtual now. But it is a culturally different experience if you haven't attended one of those before. And the same thing, you know, I mentioned I lived in Asia for several years. I watched Mulan with my kids last night, and you've seen some negative coverage about Mulan related to people in China. And there were several moments where I was cringing. You know, the stereotypical Asian or the Asian stereotypes go back to like Breakfast at Tiffany's, where I think it was Andy Rooney who dressed with tape on his eyes. And when you're sitting in Asia and you see something like that, you gasp. I remember being in Indonesia and in a boat full of Indonesians who were all Muslim, and a Chuck Norris movie came on, and everybody was smiling until Chuck Norris knocked down the door and shot a bunch of Muslims. And so, you know, we have to think about all the different implications of what we're doing. Movies are a different set, but think about, if we're having movie night, or if we're having lunch meetings, or if we're having training sessions, what are the things that we need to think about, and how do we meaningfully engage and communicate with community organizations like the NAACP, for example?
Well, I think everyone said it earlier that people are people. Unfortunately, society builds stereotypes, or society builds, barriers or what have you. But, and Keri said it, how many times have you gone out of your comfort zone to have a cup of coffee or to have a meeting with somebody that was a little different than you, or didn't have the same viewpoints, and really gave them the respect as a person to voice their side or their thoughts, and really even think to understand it. Once again, that takes a lot of hard work, but it's extremely valuable.
Completely agree. And I think a lot of what we just talked about goes into the next question. So what is the biggest mistake or misses that you see marketing teams making throughout COVID and throughout the change that we've all been experiencing the past 6 or 7 months? And this is open to everyone.
I can start. Two things. One is not marketing. There was an old Wall Street Journal ad. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to have been through several recessions. And there was an old Wall Street Journal ad back in the 90s that said, in the recession, what was it, 1991, that said the best time to take market share is during a recession. It's the time when the first thing that companies do is they cut training and they cut marketing. And that's the time where you can drastically gain market share. If you look at our firm, Tucker Hall, we never do advertising, but we're aggressively advertising right now, including in the chamber newsletter and other places, because we're taking market share. We're pushing to grow our firm at a time when companies really need help. So number one is making sure that you market and promote and look at every situation as an opportunity. And I'll stop there and let my colleagues answer too.
No, it's a great point though, Bill. Thank you.
I kind of agree with Bill is we saw a lot of our clients stop marketing. The other thing, just to build on that, is to not forget about your customer. They are still buying, they will still buy. So, some of our more advanced clients, they went into deep measurement of net promoter score and really tried to hone their customer experience, because they knew on the other side of COVID, there was a whole other opportunity. We have one large moving and storage organization, and going into COVID, they don't use net promoter score, they use another metric, but it was around 4.1. By focusing on changing their experience and adding some things, they got it up to a 4.6. And now they have more business, because moving and storage on the other side of COVID is kind of out of control. So not only are they keeping the customers, but they're getting more customers because of it.
Yeah, I think the other thing is just not honing in on the skills versus honing in on roles, or I think marketing functions are now starting to use more contingent and to capture some of the skills that they were looking for. And it's a trend generally anyway. But one mistake I see is that, they're still hiring, based on experience, not capability. And the capabilities that we need going forward are really different than what we needed historically. And so just being really intentional and clear about what capabilities you actually need that are going to generate new revenue and new revenue streams. And I think, doing what you did before is probably the most dangerous thing you could do right now.
If I could add one more thing. One thing that I noticed that a lot of marketers are doing now, everything is data driven, everything is algorithm driven, and data does not equal customers. It doesn't equal customer experiences. You can measure everything as much as you want. I could give lots and lots of examples, I won't bore you, where companies went off the cliff because they were measuring data and they thought they were doing fine. It's the disruptors or the innovators that will end up doing well, especially in this environment. We always have to think a couple steps ahead of whatever is happening. I'll give you a quick anecdote. Years ago when I was working in Singapore, one of my clients was the largest bank in Singapore, and they brought in a quant fund, a computer system that started trading stocks on the Singapore market, and they ran it against their regular traders. For 6 months, the quant fund beat the traders, and then after that, the traders outsmarted it. And so now the algorithms are being taught to be self-learning, and they're learning psychology, and they're trying to constantly think ahead. But I think that the human brain will continue to think ahead of that. And if your if your competitors are using the similar kinds of algorithms, the similar kinds of tools, the way you're going to be successful is be disruptive in your thinking about marketing in the fullest sense.
I love that comment, Bill, because we actually have a very large customer that's rolling out some AI and bots, and they're having challenges with it, kind of as you're saying. But every time we talk to them about it, it's because they're ignoring their customer, they're ignoring their employees. And, you know, yeah, the bot's training itself, but it's not getting all the other input that you normally get.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it for sure. All right, a lot of what we've talked about has been about current state. The next couple of questions are going to focus on jobs and what the job market is. I know we have some students from University of Tampa and maybe even those that have been in positions that have been laid off or furloughed. So could each of you kind of talk about what the current state of the job market is for marketing and any other field that you're involved in?
We see clients hiring. Some clients have been cutting back, of course, but other clients are hiring strategically. Just like marketing, it's a good idea to market during a downturn. It's a good idea to look for the best and brightest people because a lot of them will be available at no fault of their own because of the environment. And so we need to do that. The other big trend that I see is that the former hiring funnel has been turned upside down. And what I mean by that is that the interns used to come inside a company and they would be apprentices and they would learn for 6 months or a year before they had enough experience to move up. Now what's happening is that interns are coming in and they're teaching companies things. And a big example locally is Scott Riley's firm FinTech, which built, I don't know the number, but probably hundreds of millions of dollars of value because a couple interns came in and told them to focus on data analytics. And so what we have to do is think about the young folks. My son, who's 18 at FSU, is working with a 17-year-old, and they're starting a data analytics company of their own and trying to outsmart everybody. And so we've got to listen to the best ideas. The disruptors probably are going to be in the 18 to 22 range, although they could be at any age. But we need to make sure in our diversity that we're listening to people of all ages. And the last thing I'll say is the people 18 to 22, please don't look at the rest of us as not being in tune either, because I'm in Generation X. Generation X created a lot of the tools that we're using these days. We need to make sure that we listen to everybody's perspective. Everybody's perspective is important, and especially in how we use technology and how we think about where the market's going.
Doug, did you have anything you wanted to share?
I was deferring to Keri, but I was actually ready to listen to her. I think she's got the most.
Well, I mean, you know, one of the things that's happening in the job market is that before COVID, we were, you know, desperately sourcing talent, right? And then there became this optic of availability of talent, but the skills, I'm going to keep going back to this, that are in demand are still in demand. So if you do have that opportunity to do a talent grab, you know, that it is the time to do that, to Bill's point. I think you know, we are seeing the types of roles and skills that people are looking for are different, you know, demand generation, lead generation, specifically in marketing, you know, chief experience officers is an emerging concept that I think is really important. I'm sure you're seeing that, Doug. And, you know, I think what is going to continue to happen with the talent market is that as innovation happens, new fields emerge, right? New skills are needed. And so what's different about this economic situation is that we have new needs as a society. And so I think the job market's going to look different, but I don't think the need and growth in terms of jobs and opportunities is necessarily going to be as bad as everybody thinks it is. You know, I think there's going to be different opportunities, not the same.
The interesting thing that we're seeing on the job market is with more virtual working, I mean, you can really work from anywhere. So you can hire somebody that works from anywhere. And that really wasn't the thinking prior. that you said, I need somebody in my backyard. So it's adjusted the thought processes. Now, from a skill, I totally agree with what Keri's saying, is that they're shifting. Now, I always see, you know, kind of the things that are hard, right? So filling up a blank page with copywriting or anything like that is always in demand. And there's always a spot, but to the point, that doesn't have to be done where your company is. So it's an opportunity and a curse at the same time. It also shifts to more of the gig economy, and allowing that a little bit more because of the virtual working.
You open up your pool of candidates a lot bigger if you're able to hire, like you said, from all over. And you kind of touched on this in the last question, but Keri, I know you talked about marketing skills. Is there any other marketing skills that are in highest demand right now? I know a lot of the technical platforms and technology we've talked about, but is there anything else that we haven't already mentioned?
I think conversational marketing is, you know, obviously taking off, and what's happening with like Drift, which is now, you know, a partially Tampa-based organization. I think the trend towards, you know, thinking about the person and the persona versus just the audience demographics. So I think Bill was making the point earlier, it's like it goes beyond what's on paper, right? And there's context that we need to create, and there's sort of this trend towards show me, don't tell me. And I think we have so much content and knowledge right now. It's like, how do you actually visually bring it to life and tell what it is that your organization does for the world that's different? And I think the words are getting lost because there's so many words out there. So I just think there's going to be a whole new world. I mean, as you look at what's out there with like the social dilemma, and if you've seen that on Netflix, how, you know, people are going to start looking at social media differently too. And is it making me a programmed response to, I'm doing now what they want me to do? And so more people are kayaking than on social media now. It's like how we adapt from that, from a skills perspective, is going to be really different.
Keri, that's a great point. The social media and the influence it has, not just on the buying patterns, but more on the attitude, right? That's what we're seeing, and it's been extremely interesting as we've done research around it.
To add to that, Stuart Brown is part of the chamber with Accenture. I think still works globally despite the pandemic, but he has spoken a couple places where I've been, and he talks about how Accenture a year or two ago had 20,000 software robots, and the last I heard they were at 60,000. They're probably up to 100,000 now. But software robots are doing to white-collar jobs what mechanization did to blue-collar jobs 100 years ago. Anything that's process-oriented is going to be gone within the next few years because the software robots will take care of it. The other thing that Accenture is doing, and they're just one example, is he told me they bought, I don't remember the number, like the top 20 digital marketing companies in the world. And what they're doing is analyzing their processes and automating them with software robots. And so the question is, what will marketers be doing in the future? And if we're training our next generation to write code, it could be that AI is going to write code. If we're teaching them to do basic segmentation or basic data analysis, it's possible that AI will be doing all that. What we really need to do is teach people how to think critically, how to think creatively, and how to be disruptors. Those are the people that will still have jobs. Unless you all remember the movie WALL-E, where everybody's sitting around and the robots do everything. If we're lucky enough to have a situation like that, hopefully not the Matrix, then we'll end up in a situation where we'll have to work. But otherwise, the people that will still be employed, especially at high rates, will be the people who can think ahead of the AI, that think differently than the AI. And we need to more and more teach people how to think, how to analyze, and how to be creative.
And how to be better leaders. I mean, all of that, plus, you know, we have to be better humans to each other, to our teams, and, you know, building the leadership skills in addition to letting the technology do that work for us. lets us have the time to be able to be better humans. And so, you know, part of that complexity, it will never be able to mimic. Like, we think differently, to Bill's point. I think that's such a great point.
It is. And Bill, you perfectly segued into our next question. So with digital transformation accelerating, what emerging platforms and technology are in highest demand, and how are candidates retooling for those technologies?
Well, I'll just start with Doug. I'm sure knows more about the technology than I do, since that was his business and kind of is now. Somebody posted on the chat here, don't overlook older workers. And I think I said that earlier, that we need to make sure we listen to people at all ages. But we all have to constantly retrain. And there are a few basic questions when somebody comes in to interview with us that I'll ask them. And if they don't know the answers to the basic questions, I'll send them to lots of websites to go do self-training. There are lots of free resources online, like Content Marketing Institute, AMA has resources, PRSA has resources, and you can learn from those resources what the latest tools and techniques are, and then start applying them and experimenting in your job wherever you are right now, so that you're prepared to take whatever the next job might be.
You know, technology is funny because it's progressed. You know, I used to own a company that we built websites and pretty simple websites. What we would take, you know, months to build, now you can do in a matter of hours, because it's just changed, right? There's tools to do it. There's tools to code faster now. So it's just modified. I really echo what Bill was saying about critical thinking. You know, I would call it systems thinking, but I mean, it's the same thing. It's being able to understand a problem, have the empathy around the problem, and put multiple pieces together to create an outcome. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are afraid to make things and explore the technologies. You know, most of the technologies out there are, you know, it's kind of like a painter and a paintbrush. Which paintbrush do you want to use? The technology you can learn fairly quickly. If you really want to go into some things like Power BI, which is like a Microsoft Analytics, RPA, you know, Bill was talking about the robots. RPA is robotic process automation. There's a couple different platforms out there for that, but it's really just, if you do something that's a linear process, you essentially map it, it creates the code around it, and it does it for you. So if you took information out of a document and put it into a computer system, it just basically replicates that. And then, you know, I still think marketing automation is still here. Things like HubSpot, Marketo, Salesforce even has it. Those are a lot of the tools that, yeah, you have to have the skills, but I really echo what was said earlier around the critical thinking skills and the system skills.
I think certifications too. I mean, there's so many out there that you can get through universities or the tech platforms themselves that are, you know, validating if you're a candidate on the market to stay current and using your time to, you know, capture some of that content and skill. You know, they're so readily available and not expensive or free. So just taking advantage of this time where all of that access has been opened up.
You know, that's great. You know, Coursera and sites out there like that have university. I actually had my son take a course over the summer in physics because I was like, it's free. Why are you not taking this? So that's a great point. There's so, you know, once again, there haven't been these tools before. So to have ready access for them for free, you're crazy not to use them.
And just to add into that too, we didn't mention, I don't think we mentioned YouTube, which I think most of us watch now instead of regular TV. But similar story to Doug, my 9-year-old recently was talking to me, and I said, instead of watching YouTube, why don't you go study something like quantum mechanics? And he said, what do you want to know about quantum mechanics? And so I started asking questions, and he knew more about it than I did. And I said, how do you know that? He said, what do you think I'm doing on YouTube?
Yep.
And, you know, he's 9, 10 years old. And that's, you know, that's what all of us are doing now. If you know, HubSpot also and these other vendors, they have online videos, but any of it you can get on YouTube right now. If you don't know how to do something, just look it up on YouTube. It saves time training. You can sit at home and watch YouTube at your own pace and figure it out. And then you can go back to your in-house trainers or outsource trainers and ask them specific questions, but you would have already learned everything on YouTube. No kind of technology has to be intimidating. Everything you want to know, you can find that on YouTube.
That's a great point. Actually, we were talking to a business process outsourcing company a while ago, and they have like a tier 1 call center. So if you're having trouble with your cell phone or whatever, they manage that. And they said, man, the market's shifting because you don't call that anymore. You go to YouTube. Okay, how do I set something up on my cell phone? It's just a difference in the world today. It's crazy.
I know a lot of the universities were doing, like you had said, courses over the summer that were free, open to everyone. So the opportunity for training is definitely more readily available now than it's ever been. So the last question I'm going to leave you all with. So how are marketing leaders, teams, and candidates best plugging into the community? And this is open for everyone.
Bill should lead first. Bill's so tied into everything. I'd defer first to him.
No, I think you all are too. I think it's important to sit in on as many seminars like this as possible. If you're interested in an industry, AMA, PRSA, and others are having seminars, and to the extent that they'll do like this, where you can see who's on, like Alfred's on, who's been a friend for a long time. It's a great way for you to remember that you have or haven't stayed in touch with people very well. I haven't talked to Alfred in a year or more, and this reminds me I need to follow up with him. And so, and I want to ask him where he got his cartoon done too, so I can get one like that. But I think the more that we stay engaged, and as much as possible with these Zoom or other meetings would be great. And then as we can start to get back in person, we can. Also, just emailing people from time to time, going through your Salesforce list or whatever, and calling people, emailing them. I found at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really, really easy to get in touch with anybody because everybody was just sitting at home. Now people are in a transition period, starting to kind of go back. Interestingly enough, leadership of Tampa typically is in Maine and Highland, North Carolina for the summer. And I'm seeing a lot of people staying later now because of COVID-19, and they might even stay until it starts to snow. And so we're not going to be able to have coffee with people the way we used to. We're going to have to stay in touch with them by phone or Zoom or some other method.
Great point, Bill. Keri, Doug?
I guess my add to that would just be, what can you do from a community giving perspective? There's so much need right now, and creating community around getting involved and trying to help organizations. I'm super connected to a bunch of different organizations here locally, like Feeding Tampa Bay. And we started a women's leadership group called Bee League. And, the idea to me is just that there's a lot of people that are in some of the most trying times of their lives right now, and trying to use the skills that we do have to help those organizations while they're going through that time, and getting your teams involved virtually in doing that. It goes a long, long way for everybody putting meaning back in the workday. And, I think that's a huge driver of employee experience. So it has this like reciprocal effect of, helping, but also helping your employees feel connected to what the work you're doing too.
Yeah, I think COVID's made it difficult because you used to be able to go to a meeting, you'd see somebody, you grab them, go to the corner, talk business, whatever. But I would echo some of the things that I think people have been kinder through this, and they've been more accepting of taking meetings. They also know that, it's going to be online, so it's a little bit faster. I've been surprised that there have been a lot of, and maybe it's the humanistic aspect of, we all want to talk to each other. We all want to connect. So, I know when people have reached out to me that I normally wouldn't connect to, as long as it's an interesting discussion, I've taken it. And I think vice versa, that I've reached out to people that, maybe I wouldn't have normally talked to, that have accepted the calls as well. So I think it's, be bold and try to connect. Yeah, it's not going to work for everybody, but I think we all are a little bit more interested in each other, given all the things that are going
on. Can I just add two more anecdotes along the lines of what Keri was saying? I think that's really important, and part of it is pay it forward. Debbie Lundberg just gave one of her kidneys.
Yeah, that was crazy. Good for her.
you know, an amazing story with my nonprofit hat. I put on a thing called Cafe con Tampa, which has a lot of videos. We just interviewed her, really amazing. But I'll give you a quick anecdote. A few years ago, a lady came to my office trying to find a job. And as I was talking to her, it turned out that her family was in New Mexico. And I said, why don't you go back to New Mexico and work there? And she said, there's no firm like yours in New Mexico. I don't know what I would do there. And I said, why don't you start one? And she said, I don't know how to do that. And I said, I'll help you. Well, we have no business. My firm has no business in New Mexico. We had no connections to New Mexico at all. And so I just started helping her. I gave her copies of our contracts. I gave her copies of our marketing stuff and just started helping her just to be nice. A few months later, as she started up, she called us and said, hey, would you guys be willing to pitch this piece of business with us? And it was an international, worldwide company. They ended up being our biggest client for the next 2 years after that. And she now is listed as, if not the largest, the second largest public relations, public affairs firms in New Mexico. And so it's an example where you never know who you might help and how that might come around if you pay it forward. I'm sure what Debbie did is going to, in goodwill and karma, is going to pay off in some way. And the last point is that don't just think about the charities, think about your neighbors. People think about South Tampa as being rich. On a Thursday afternoon, go to the South of Gandy Civic Association. They work with Feeding Tampa Bay and I think Metropolitan Ministries, and they give away food to people in South Tampa, people who live in South Tampa who don't have food. There are neighbors of ours all around wherever you live who don't have jobs anymore and can't afford food. And there is great need right now. And I think several folks have said it, but it's a time for humanity and a time for empathy. And because we never know when it's going to happen to you. And we need to make sure we constantly pay it forward.
And I think, like Keri had mentioned, bringing your team in and allowing that to help build your team is something that I think will pay dividends on your team building and being able to keep everyone together and strong. Thank you all. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to meet with all of us. I know the information and the great insight that each of you gave will be huge in helping all of our attendees. I'm going to kick it back over to David to close us off, but thank you all, and thank you for having me.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill, for that great story and inspiring message on paying it forward to close us out. Thank you to all of our panelists and Jacquelyn and the Tampa Bay Chamber for your partnership. I did take down 3 quotes, which I wanted to share, one from each of our panelists. So from Keri Higgins-Bigelow, "It's a tech-enabled world, but it's all about the humans, and we all need to be better humans." From Doug, "Old-fashioned storytelling has made a comeback to bring people together." And you actually had a second one, "Be bold and connect." And then Bill Carlson, and I merged a few of your comments, so this is taken with some liberty, but "Objectives are changing with increased data-driven marketing, but pay attention to disruptors and the heightened need for awareness and training in our current political environment." So thank you, everyone. As we close out, mentioning that our next event for AMA Tampa Bay will be Wednesday, October 21st over the same lunch hour. The topic will be setting your 2021 budget for agency and marketing. Our keynote starter there will be from PepsiCo Marketing, and the event is up and free for early bird registration through September 30th. So I hope to see you there. And in the meantime, thank you and have an amazing week.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you,
everyone.